was 17 years old, and I was fussing at my mom to sign my papers so I could go in the Navy. She wouldn't sign them. My Uncle Bob Phillips, who was also a preacher, is my mom's brother. Uncle Bob came down one day to visit from Ohio, and he knew that I was fussing to join the Navy. And my Uncle Bob said to my mom, said, Ivy, said, go ahead and sign his papers. Said, they'd never take him. You know, he's a physical wreck. They'd never take him. You know, pneumonia 9 times before I was 16 years old, and all kind of, you know, illnesses and things. That's what my uncle told my mom. Said, go ahead and sign his papers. Said, they'd never take him at all. So Mom signed my papers. I took off for Huntington one morning by bus. Got down there and went to the recruiting station, signed up, and they sent us over to the place to get a physical. We came back, and before we knew it, they lined us up in a hall and said, raise your right hand. I raised my right hand. That guy said he had spaghetti all over him, you know, scrambled eggs on his hat, you know. And he said, raise your hand, the right hand. We raised our right hand. He said, repeat after me. And we repeated. And when we finished all that rigmarole, he said, you're now members of the United States Navy. And that was it. We were in. And then they took us down and got us a big meal to eat. We was down at that restaurant, and I knew we was going to be leaving out of there shortly from Huntington. So I went to the pay telephone and called my mom, reversed the charges. I said, Mom, she said, Herb, said, where are you? I said, Mom, I said, I'm in the Navy. She said, you're what? I said, I'm in the Navy. She said, listen, said, you get home just as quick as you can. And I laughed at her, and I said, Mom, I said, I'm leaving here shortly for Bainbridge, Maryland. She said, you really are in the Navy? I said, I just am in the Navy. I'm already been sworn in, and I'm heading for boot camp. I'll see you in about, I think I said, see you in about 15 weeks or something like that. And she was really shocked. See, she thought I'd go down there and fail the physical, and they'd send me home. But I didn't. I passed the physical, and I was in. And they took us out of Huntington that night on an old train that was ready to fall over. And they had we called them cattle cars. And we rode that old train most of the night. And we went to Bainbridge, Maryland. And we got off that train. They loaded us on a great big semi, just like you haul cattle in. And drove us into the Bainbridge, Maryland Naval Base. And that's where I took my, what they call boot camp. You know, your boot camp training. Mm-hmm. I think I was there at Bainbridge, Maryland, on the Susquehanna River, beautiful river. And I was there in boot training for what, about, I think it was 15 weeks before I got to come home. But at Bainbridge, Maryland, you'll find the Susquehanna River. It's an Indian.
Susquehanna?
Susquehanna.
I wanted to ask Papa about the guy who would walk around mumbling cement mixer putsy putsy.
Well, the little story about the cement mixer putsy putsy. This happened in boot camp, in training at Bainbridge, Maryland. Of course, we had a big, like a big dormitory where we lived, and all my whole company. I forget what company I was in, but anyhow, we lived in this big dormitory. We had showers, big place for showers, and inside toilets and all that. And we had our bunk beds. We had bottom bunk, top bunk, and we would have inspections where we'd have to line up at the foot of the bunk, and these people would come through, the officers would come through and examine and see how good we were doing on taking care of the bunks and things. But anyhow, I got a guy that was on top of my. I was on the bottom bunk. He was on the top of the bunk, and he had sat up there on that thing when we were at free time. He'd sit up there and he'd sing this stupid song, cement mixer, putsy putsy, and he'd just keep keeping time with his singing, you know.
Cement makes a putty putty. Cement makes a putty putty. Cement makes a putty putty. A puddly rooty, puddly rooty, puddly scooty. Cement makes a putty putty. Cement makes a putty putty. Cement makes a putty putty. I puddly rooty, puddly rooty, blah blah.
Just a real aggravation. Cement mixer, putsy putsy. And if I remember right, he picked on me. And see, I was only 17 when I went in. I wasn't very big. And this guy kind of picked on me all the time. And just do little things, you know. Step on my bunk when he climbed up in his bunk, and just different things. I can't remember all the details, but anyhow, that's what he would do. And he'd just sing that over and over again 1,000 times. Cement mixer, putsy putsy. Well, anyhow, there's some old boy there in a bunk or two away or something. He knew what was going on. And I think finally the day came when this friend of mine told that guy in no uncertain terms. He said, "You either stop harassing Capehart," or he said, I'm going to work you over about right." I guess he throwed the fear to him. Well, things got better, and I didn't have to listen to putsy putsy anymore. And got a little more respect. But a lot of times the big tough guys would run over the little weak guys. And I suppose compared to all of them in that company, I was one of the little weak guys. Though there was a little Filipino guy, littler than I was. And we had them from all over the country, north, south, east, and west, in that company. And that's all about that story. And then I was gone all that time for boot camp. Then after boot camp, they give you about a week's leave, or maybe 2 weeks. I came home on leave, then I went back to the USS.
Is this picture?
USS Soley.
Is this picture when you went home on that leave?
It'd be hard to tell. See, it was the summertime because I had my summer white socks. In the winter, you wore blue. It could have very well been when I was home on boot camp. But see, I went in the Navy in July '46. Yeah, that'd still been summertime time I got home, probably on leave. You see, the DD-707 USS Soley was a 2,200-ton destroyer. 2,200 ton. The destroyer that was just ahead of out before the 2,200 was called a 2,100 ton, and it had 3 gun turrets, 5-inch 38 gun turrets. That's the big guns. We had 3 turrets, but we had 2 guns, 2 barrels in each turret. You see, so that's the way it was. Yeah, you see here. There's the front turrets. Those are 5-inch 38s, and then there's one back on the back end. And this a destroyer, they're called a gunboat.
Right.
That thing was loaded. That thing was loaded with guns. 5-inch 38s. We had depth charges along the what they call K guns along the side, and we had 40 millimeter anti-aircraft guns. We had 20 millimeter guns, and we had depth charges. But you know how they work. They're set for so many feet that when they go down, say if they go down 500 feet, they'll explode. And that's when they have to know where the submarine, where the enemy might have a sub. If they're at 500 feet and it explodes at 500 feet and you're right on it, then
you get them.
Yeah. Then you know what them Germans used to do? They would have a way on their submarine that they could send up an oil slick. They could do it themselves.
Make you think they can.
And the people on top would think, "Well, we got him, look at that oil, that stuff coming up." And Germans were smart. They had it fixed so they could put a big oil slick out, and so the people on top would say, "Boy, we sure got that sub. Look at all that oil. He's hurt. He's run." It didn't touch him. There was a lot of tricks.
there was one time when you went through a really bad storm, and you would go on top of one wave, and then you'd crash through the next wave.
But we see what happens when the storm really hits at the sea. We saw waves. You know, you think of waves as maybe as high as
6 feet.
well, yeah, even like 6 feet waves. You think, boy, the big waves, you know. Well, that's a ripple compared to some of them waves. We saw waves that's probably as high as a 20-story building. I mean, you know, huge waves, just up and then down, and it's just like going down in a valley. And this one storm was probably off Cape Hatteras on the east coast. It was a real. So anyhow, we were in a real rough storm, and what you do
Right here at Cape Hatteras.
Yeah.
Off the coast of North Carolina.
Right. See, we took on ammunition here at Bayonne, New Jersey, someplace right up here. We took on ammunition, and I went on. I don't even know where I went. I think I went on board the Soley in New York. But anyhow, this storm. See, the destroyer. What happens? They bolt down all the hatches, you know, and you can't go out on the deck or you get swept overboard. But see, that old ship would raise, just you could feel it just going right up, the whole thing moving right up in the air. The front of it, see, just kind of going right up. And all of a sudden, she'd hit the top of the wave, then down she'd come a little bit faster. And we'd go right down in the bottom of them huge waves. And when we'd hit the bottom of that thing, that old ship would go, just hit and just vibrate, shake. Just shake, rattle like that. And then she'd stay down a little bit, and pretty soon here she started coming back up again. You know, we'd go over a wave, and then through a wave, over the next wave, and through the next one. And so we'd go over the wave and down in the valley like it was, and then we would hit that wave broadside right into it. But to see the front of the ship is designed to do that, you see, sharp, and it cuts right in. So she'd hit right in that wave, and we'd go right through it. Then we'd come up out of there with a big thrust and over the next wave, and then when we hit down in the bottom, bam, and she just vibrate and shake and everything. And if you was laying in those bunks, see, in the compartment I was in about back in this part of the ship here. There was compartments up front, compartments back there. When I say compartments, I mean
back end.
let me see here.
This is the back of the ship here.
Yeah, in other words, there was depth charges, I think. I can't see it too good. But anyhow, we went inside what they call the super strip up here, and you go down steps into your compartment, you know, and the bunks were leather. I mean, they were canvas bunks, and they had little like copper eyes all the way around the bunk. And then you would tie them onto these. The bunk was actually made out of a metal, like aluminum metal rod, and they could be raised up, you see, to make room, more room. But when you put them down, then you had a mattress you laid on it, and sometimes you just slept on the canvas. But I believe there was a little mattresses that fit on them. And when you'd lay in that bunk and you was in a bad storm, you could just hear them. Oh, them old chains just rattle, rattle, rattle. Everything there rattled. So it was quite an experience to be in a storm out in the ocean on a destroyer like the USS Soley, and to ride that storm and go through that storm. You know. And of course, you know, the storm would be over, waves would settle down, and I have seen the surface just as smooth as glass, you know. Stand on the back here when the screws are really moving, and you could hear them going. It's kind of a suction roast. They were so powerful. They just pulling air right down off the surface through them screws. Those ships were powerful. We went into Norfolk to be what they call it, demagnetized, and that's when Captain Giver. I think he gave full speed in reverse, and then he got off track and he rammed into one of the great big piers. And I can still see them. They're like big telephone poles, all bound together in a bundle, and the ends of them was driven into the bottom of the bay. And when we hit them things and knocked them loose, here'd be, you could see them sticking up this way, and all of a sudden they'd come loose in the bottom, and that just like a big telephone pole, you'd come right out of the water. Here's the surface of the water, it'd go. Just shoot way up there, then pow, she'd hit, and just float, you see.
Mm-hmm.
We stood there and watched them things coming up out of the water, and just like a shot out of a gun. And she'd hang her, and then pow, boy, when she hit the water, just smacked the water. And then it'd float off you. And all of them had to be picked up and everything. And that's where we tore the screws up. Next thing I knew, we were in dry dock. And dry dock is where you pull into like a big stall, really like you might say a big swimming pool. You pull in there, and then they close the gates and they pump all the water out. And as the water goes out, the ship settles right down on things that they've got under the ship, to hold it. So once all the water's out, they can get right down underneath there and work on the ship. Paint the bottom, and this time they had to put new screws in because we tore the screws up when we hit them, what they call palisters. When we hit them, it tore the screws up bad, and that was a pretty expensive job. See, I used to stand radar watches. We could stand on the radar room. Up where the pilot is,
At the very top here by the radar dish?
Yeah, there's a radar, that thing goes around all the time, and we was right up in here, see? And anyhow, I was on the radar watch, and we had a thing there that I could sit on a stool and look into these scopes, look at this big scope, and I could go out 20 miles, or I could go out 40 miles, and search the whole area to see if there's anything out there. And I'd just sit there and watch that scope, and when that radar beam turns on that scope, it's just like a little sweeping hand, you see, like a little finger was going round and round. Well, if there's something out there, that radar would hit it and bounce back, of course, and I'd see just a little dot of light, just a little dot of light on the scope, and of course you didn't have to be very well trained to run this. It was simple. Then I had some little handles, little things you turn, and I'd run this one little dot out and put it right on top of that other dot. And I'd run another dot out and put it right on top there. And in 3 minutes, when anything came within 20 miles or 40 miles of us, but we usually run 20 miles, We'd check 40 if we needed to. But for 20 miles around that ship in any direction, that radar told us whatever was there. And if something came on the screen, I could check it 3 times. In 3 minutes, I could tell you exactly what their speed was and exactly what direction it's going in. And see, after dark, when you're running on radar, you have to depend on that radar. That's your eyes. And we've been on collision course, before. One time I was on radar watching this big old block came in, this little light came on the scope, and I kept tracing it. Pretty soon, of course, we tell the bridge what's up, what's coming. And this thing was coming right straight at us. And after I gave 3 readings, I told the whatever you call them, boatswain, whoever was up there at the helm, we'd tell them exactly what was happening. And so whatever this was coming at us wasn't about to move, except right on straight to us. So we swerved, and we swerved over to the right. And when I saw this thing getting real close on the radar screen, I left my post and just walked out. I walked out on the superstructure where I could see, and I looked over there, and probably say a quarter of a mile from us, an old ship was plowing through the sea. It was rust from one end to the other. I didn't see a light. I didn't see a sailor. It looked like just a ghost ship. And that thing was moving right on to its destination, and it was as rusty. It was nothing but rust. It was a rust ball. And that old thing was still carrying cargo across that sea to going someplace. We don't know where they're going. But I never will forget that, because that made quite an impression.
A collision course.
Yeah, in the Navy, when I was in the Navy, you fought rust all the time. Rust, we had paint that was designed to stop rust. But that old rust ball that went by that day, I never will forget that. I kept looking. I thought, well, surely I'll see a sailor or somebody out on the deck or something, because the sea wasn't real bad. But I never saw not one light or nothing, just like it was a ghost ship. I could see up where there had to be somebody in there driving that thing, you know. Crazy thing. Then I had another position that I did. I was in the center of the ship, almost right in the dead center of the ship. You know, in other words, when I say dead center, I mean right in the middle of it. Mm-hmm. And then right down in the heart of the ship was the CIC room, Combat Information Center. And from that room right down in that inside the ship, there's CIC room. Then we could aim and fire these guns from down there. All the sailors did in the turrets is load everything in and get her ready to fire, and then that's all they could do. And we could actually, with that radar, there could have been a 55-gallon barrel floating in the water, and we could hit it many miles. In other words, that radar was so accurate that once you aimed these guns with that radar, once them guns fired, you'd hit your target. We could because we never did get in combat, but you could just put a 5-inch 38 shell right down an enemy's smokestack if you wanted to. I was standing right in front of this
the front gun
right on the deck. I stand on the deck, and we were down in the Caribbean Sea. We were down in around Cuba, mm-hmm. Guantanamo Bay, and a flying fish flew right on the ships, and I saw the fish flopping around with wings on the sides of it.
So a flying fish.
Flying fish
Flew right onto the boat.
Yeah. Well, we were kind of you know, moving up and down some, so when we went down, it made it easier. See, those flying fish will come out of a big wave. They'll come just bursting right out of a wave, and they'll fly maybe for 100 feet or maybe 200 feet, as hard as they can go, and then they dive right back in. They're called flying fish. They can swim and fly.
That's fun.
Yeah, and one I stand up there one time when we was cruising, and one of those things hit on the deck. I got a chance to look at it pretty close. It was about that long, about 8 inches long, I think it was, kind of slender, and those wings folded right back alongside the body of the fish. There was a turret right back here on the back of it, what they call a 20-millimeter turret. And we were working on that one day, and it was we took the big piece of metal out, and when we was getting it out of there to hand it down, I jumped down on the deck and reached up to get it. And no, that's right. The other guy jumped out on the deck, and he reached up to get it, and I couldn't quite get to it. But when he let go and jumped, I had the whole thing holding, and it strained me real hard to hang on to it, because I couldn't drop it and hit him. But I held on to it, and that's where I ruptured myself.
Where's your rupture?
Right there.
You had a hernia?
Yeah. I ruptured myself, and I'm sure that's when it was, because I could feel it pull, you know. And I tore the inner
muscle,
and developed a hernia. And later, I went in the hospital at Greenville. No, not Greenville, but Charleston, South Carolina. When we were in there, that's where we put the ship out of commission. And I think that's where it was that I went into the hospital and had surgery for a hernia.
Did they fix it?
They fixed it. Just never let go yet.
Do you have a little scar where they did the incision?
About 6 inches.
Really? Well, now tell us about a fellow that had the anchor earring.
Well, if my memory serves me right, which you must remember, I'm thinking back many, many years. And there's a guy, I think his name was Fitzgerald. And he was kind of a big raw bone type guy and kind of rough. And he would, when he'd get ready to go on liberty, he'd stick one of these big table cigarette lighters in his pocket, in that front pocket there on our Navy suits. And that's how he lit his cigarettes. Well, it was like a blowtorch. And if you'd ask him for a light, he'd give you a light all right. And he'd burn about half of your cigarette up in giving you a light. But when he hit that thing, it just boom, a great big flame from up there. And he could have lit 10 cigarettes at one time if he wanted to. But he just did crazy things. And one thing, Matthew, he had a gold ring in one of his ears, and from that gold ring was a gold chain came down, and it was maybe 20 inches long or so, but on the end of that chain was a gold anchor, and he would have that gold chain hooked to his ear, and it would come down and over, and he'd put that anchor in his shirt pocket, in the pocket of his Navy suit. And then when he would go into a bar to drink, he'd order a drink, and then he'd take that anchor up, pull that anchor up out of his pocket, swing it over and drop it into the drink. And that's when he dropped anchor. And so he would drink. I got to hear the story there. What he would do when he when he first got up to the bar, I forgot about this.
He ordered a glass of water.
Right. He ordered a glass of water, and the bartender would bring him a glass of water. Then he'd pull that anchor up out of his pocket, swing it over and drop it in the glass of water. Then at that time, then he would order his drinks. But being a true sailor, he couldn't drink anything until he dropped anchor, and that's what he would do. Then when he got ready to leave, he'd pull anchor up and wipe the thing off a little bit, stick it back in his pocket, and that's the way he wore it. Of course, he got in trouble over that some. And he's the same guy. We would have inspections on board ship, and he went to the barber shop, and they laid a 50-cent piece or maybe a silver dollar right on top of his head, and they cut everything else off. He had one shock of hair right in the top of his head, about 15 inches long. And he went down to the kitchen and got a great big turkey leg bone, or maybe it was a big chicken bone, a leg bone. And then he took that big shock of hair on top of his head. He would wind that thing around somehow. He fixed that chicken bone right in the top of that big shock of hair. And then the rest of his head was shaven, And I mean to tell you, he'd look at you and about scare the daylights out of you just looking at him. He looked like something off of a cannibal island or something. And one day we all was on board on deck, and the captain was having inspection. And so there we all stood. Old Fitzgerald was standing there, and then the captain has a certain order he gives, and when he gives the order, on one you reach up and get a hold of your hat, and on two you take your hat off and stand at attention. So they come up to that bunch where I was in the, I guess it was called the ordnance, but old Fitzgerald was standing there, and the captain gave orders to take our hats off. And when old Fitzgerald pulled his hat down, this captain was kind of a little short fella, kind of heavy set. He come walking along and looking at each sailor, looking at the haircuts and everything, and he came to Fitzgerald. And he stopped, and he looked at that chicken bone or turkey bone and that shock of hair, and right on top of his head, he looked him over real good. And the captain said, "Get that cut off right away." And of course, old Fitzgerald, all he could say is, "Yes, sir." And but anyhow, that's the way the story goes. And so he had to shave that thing off. But he went on liberty that way. But see, when he had his sailor hat on, he just looked like a normal guy.
Okay, I'm going to read from the history of the USS Soley. This happened immediately before you were on. It says the ship remained on duty in Japan until February 1946, when she was ordered to return to the U.S. to report to Casco Bay, Maine. The return trip included stops in Hawaii, Long Beach, California, and the Panama Canal. During the return trip, one shipmate reflected that only 8 officers and about 1/3 of the original crew now remained on board. Then on April 24th, CDRTA Torgerson, U.S. Navy, relieved CDR, that's commanding, what does that mean?
Listen, CDR.
And CDR Lewis as commanding officer. July found Soley undergoing an overhaul period at the Brooklyn Navy Yard.
That's where I went on board, right there.
Okay. Along with the rest of the ships of her division. That was when Ensign Robert J. Kubazoski lost his new hat as he reported aboard for duty. I don't know, you know who that is?
Mm-mm.
Okay, as the pipeline of newly recruited post-war personnel continued to replace departing veterans, Soley was now manned by some 32 officers, 20 CPOs, and about 250 enlisted personnel. So that was you right there.
Well, when I went on board, see, I went in the Navy in July. I went through boot camp. I came home on leave, and I reported back to Brooklyn, to the Navy yards there, where, like I said, it was undergoing some repairs, and that's when I went on board the Soley right there. Right.
And then it says, because right now it says that there were, at that time it says there was 32 officers, 20 CPOs, and about 250 enlisted.
CPO is a Chief Petty Officer.
Those are just people that have been there for a while.
No, Chief Petty Officer. They were pretty powerful people. Chief Petty Officer. See, there was like third class, second class, first class, then Chief Petty Officer, right on up the line. See, it's all that's the way it's set up.
Well, it says the overpopulation of the ship's personnel was short-lived, as August saw the final drafts of personnel leave the ship for discharge when the wartime point system reached its final stages of demobilization. By August, the officers numbered 15, and only about 45 personnel remained in the crew, 6 or 7 of who were CPOs. So you were in that 45 that remained. So the time you were there was only about...
That was in August, July?
Yeah.
No, I don't believe I wouldn't have been on board that fast, I don't believe. Well, see, I went in July, and I had to go through boot camp, which was several weeks. And then I had to go to... I went on leave, and then I went to Brooklyn, New York.
Okay, well here, this must be when you got on, because it says, toward the end of the shipyard period, new recruits began reporting aboard by the hundreds, as well as a few old-timers, which often meant a sailor with 2 or 3 years of experience. The Brooklyn overhaul period ended in November, when the ship proceeded to her newly assigned home port of Newport, Rhode Island.
Right.
After a stop in Earle, New Jersey, to load ammunition.
I was on board then. I said, what did I say? Bayonne, but Earle, New Jersey, where we took on ammo.
So you got on toward the end of that period, when you pulled out in November when the Soley left.
Yeah, that would give me enough time to have been there. But read that part again where it says about taking on ammo.
It says that the Brooklyn overhaul period ended in November when the ship proceeded to her newly assigned home port of Newport, Rhode Island, after a stop in Earle, New Jersey, to load ammunition.
Right. Okay. Well, I was on board at that time.
Then in mid-November, she proceeded to Norfolk with her green crew for de-perming and spent Thanksgiving in the Virginia port. This de-perming, that's what the demagnetizing the
I
ship.
guess the same thing as demagnetizing. I was on board then, yeah.
It says, while backing out of the de-perming pier...
They got that down there?
Yep. The untrained crew neglected to remove mooring lines in time, and the ship scraped against a pier piling. However, no damage was detected at that time.
That's right. I remember that. They said everything's fine, but it wasn't. Once we started steaming, the vibrations showed up and everything.
Yep. It says, after Thanksgiving, the ship got underway to proceed to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, for refresher training. Vibrations were noticed as the ship increased speed, indicating that the piling had caused more damage than previously thought.
Oh boy, I didn't know they'd have all that down there.
Yep.
Well, I was right there when all that happened.
This caused another change in plans as the Soley proceeded to the Portsmouth shipyard for a 10-day period to get new wheels before departing again on December 5th for Cuba. So
Yeah.
that's when they put it in the dry dock and worked on the screws?
Yep, I remember that. I could see those men down there, shipyard workers.
Mm-hmm.
They was all over that thing underneath. Yeah.
And it says, when Soley finally arrived in Guantanamo, the other ships in her division were completing their training. She did a quick turnaround, resulting in her new crew receiving little actual training. So you didn't see a lot of war games, I guess.
Well, see, that's what it was. They went down there for like training for combat, and so we were late getting there, but we caught up with them there. But I remember being in Guantanamo Bay.
That's where the Flying Fish was.
Well, this is in the Caribbean Sea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It says, with other ships of her division, Soley returned to Newport, Rhode Island by mid-December and moored to a buoy to enjoy the Christmas holiday period and make initial preparations for a scheduled February 1947 deployment to the Mediterranean. You remember that?
Yeah, I remember that, but I don't know. Did they say anything about the trip to South Pole?
They don't ever say anything about South Pole. They just mention the Mediterranean. Then it goes on and says, however, the crew was later informed that Soley was scheduled for decommissioning, and she departed Newport on January 9th en route to Charleston, South Carolina.
And when they got there, that's when I started turning sour on the Navy.
Yeah.
See, but I don't know why in the world they wouldn't mention that about that. That surely had to be a true thing, because everyone talked about it. We're all excited. We're going to get to go to the South Pole, and then when we hit them Pallisers, and it looked like they blamed it on us greenhorns down there on the deck.
Yeah, you said it was the navigator that did.
Yeah, I think the guy that they coming out of there, they must have said full speed in reverse. I heard them screws going. I look over the side and just sucking water, right, sucking air right down in it. Man, that thing was coming out of there, And then it went crooked. If it just kept coming right straight back, we'd have missed all that stuff. So that we went through that going in. But when it was starting to go, I saw it starting to go crooked. I saw the ship going over toward them, and it was right there when it hit. And when it hit, them screws was still wound out.
Did it almost knock you over when you hit?
Nah, I don't remember. It was kind of like a jar. I don't know nothing real serious. But that was crazy.
Well, all this that we're reading happened in the year 1946.
Yeah.
Then the 1947-48 year, it looks like Soley found itself in the dry dock. It says Soley arrived in Charleston on January 13th for deactivation to become a part of the enormous reserve fleet of ships constructed for service in World War II. In preparation for transfer to inactive status, LCDR W.J. Tipler, who was the commander of your ship at that time?
I don't know.
Well, anyway, it says that ship relieves CDR Torgensen as commanding officer on February 5th, and on April 15th, preparations were completed as the commissioning pennant was hauled down and Soley was decommissioned. The next 2 years were spent in mothballs, is what they...
Yeah, well, we had to preserve it all, too. Cover all them gun turrets, put coatings in the barrels so they wouldn't rust or anything. And I imagine a lot of those ships never will come out.
Well, it says that Soley came back into commission again in 1949. So, but that you were discharged
46. I went in 46, came out in 49.
So you came out in 49.
46. No, I went in 46, came out in 48.
Well, you said that there in Charleston was it when they offered you your career in the Navy, but
see, my 2 years enlistment was up in 48, and we were the ships were being out of commission, being put out of commission, and we lived on some kind of a spatial boat. It was called for personnel, an APA. It was an APA, attack personnel. I don't know, but anyhow, I was on some kind of a ship while we were there, and that's when my time ran out. And I made up my mind. See, I was going to stay in for 20 years. I could have retired when I was 35. Yeah. The officers called me into the ship's office, And I never will forget this big old fellow said, "Oh, he'd tell you an old timer. Had spaghetti all over his hat, and a lot of scrambled eggs." He was sitting there and told me to sit down. I can still remember sitting there. He started telling me what all they were going to do. I said, Capehart said, we'll let you muster out and get out of the Navy. But then you'll go home for so many days leave, 90 days leave. He said, and all this you'll get pay. And then he had several hundreds of dollars. Said, this is mustering out pay. And then said, we will give you, well, I guess you'd call it mustering in pay. They give you more money for coming back in. And they wanted me to ship over. I think I could ship over for 4 years or 6 years. Of course, they want you to ship over for as long as you can. And I sat there and listened to all that. And that old boy, he had brass. He was a commander, I think, but he had brass up his sleeves. Real nice gentleman, an older man. We talked, and here I was just a greenhorn, just begin with 19 years old. And he laid out the prettiest thing there, and he said, and also said, you'll get your third class, idea to be a third class petty officer. You know, one stripe, one D. And see, I was in fire control. We were trained to control the fire of the guns, you see. But anyhow, he sat there, talked to me just as nice as could be. Said that we've got everything, all the papers ready. Said all you have to do, if you, and said like he said, like you'd leave Monday on your leave, and you'll be home 90 days with pay and all that mustering out pay. Man, looked like a pot of gold sitting there, you know, this old boy. And after he talked a while, and everything later all out, he said, all you have to do, said, just sign right there. He had them papers all laying out there where he signed. All I had to do is sign my name down, and that settled the whole thing. And all that he said would happen. And he said to me, he said, well, Capehart, he said, what I was going to do, but I want to take advantage of all this, enlist again for 4 years, I believe it was. He never said another word. He just looked at me. And I looked at him. I said, sir, I said, I'm going home. He said, okay. I think he said, okay, sailor, and good luck to you. And he just picked them papers up, throwed them in a wire baskets laying there. You know, just throwed them in there, and told me, wish me well.
And that was it. You were out.
Well, no, I wasn't out then. See, I was getting out. See, but that was it. They would want me to ship over and stay in. See, all this mustering out pay and shipping over pay, and then big furlough. You know, I think it was 90 days. I think.
All right, you just told me about the victory medal. Why don't you tell me more about it?
Well, excuse me. See, I went in 1946, and I came out in 48. And the victory medal was the victory medal that was given to all those in the armed forces when victory came. You see, I was in the Navy before the war was over. But the fighting had pretty well stopped. So just about all the major battles had been fought and won and everything. Might have been a little bit of battle going on here and there, but when I got in the Navy, it was just at the end of everything. And so the war was over in a sense, but it wasn't over officially. So anybody that was in the military before the war was officially declared over, won a victory medal. And I was awarded a real nice victory medal. You know, I had a ribbon to wear on above my shirt pocket, and then there was a medal, a real nice looking medal, called a victory medal. It was really pretty. But I hadn't told you about that. But that's the only medal I ever got.
Bell-bottom trousers, coat of navy blue. She loves her sailor, and he loves her too. Once there was a little girl who lived next to me, and she loved a sailor boy, he was only 3. Now he's on a battleship in a sailor suit. Just a great big sailor man, but he's just as cute. In his bell-bottom trousers, coat of navy blue. She loves her sailor, and he loves her too. When her sailor boy's away on the ocean blue, soldier boys all flirt with her, but to him she's true. Though they smile and tip their caps and whistle, she just smiles and shakes her head, then she softly sighs. Bell-bottom trousers, coat of navy blue. She loves her sailor, and he loves her too. Everywhere her sailor went, she was sure to go, till one day he sailed away where she doesn't know.
Now she's going to join the waves, maybe go to sea. Try to find her sailor boy,
Wherever he may be, singing bell-bottom trousers, coat of navy blue. She loves her sailor, and he loves her too. If her sailor she can't find on the bounding main, she is hopeful he will soon come home safe again, so they can get married and raise a family. Dress up all her kiddies in sailor's dungarees, with bell-bottom trousers, coat of navy blue. She loves her sailor, and he loves her too.